In other news, Boris Johnson, the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament.
We collectively failed to impose the sanctions then that we should have put on Vladimir Putin. And we cannot make the same mistake again.
In other news,
former pub landlords accused of sending COVID bounce-back loans to ISIS fighters. And LBC's Rachel Venables with the story.
and possibly a red card. Could the Chelsea sale be off? All that and more after the news on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, prices in shops are rising at their fastest rate since September 2011. The latest British Retail Consortium index says inflation accelerated to 2.7% last month, up from 2.1% in March. The rising cost of energy and the war in Ukraine continue to impact prices. Ministers have again rejected calls for a windfall tax on oil and gas giants to help bring down energy bills after BP posted huge profits. The editor of City AM, Andy Sylvester, says the company has responded too.
BP saying, well, park the windfall tax for now, but we need to invest in the green transition. We need to invest in new technology. We need to invest in keeping the lights on. And of course, we need to invest in ensuring the UK has security of supply, which means it doesn't rely on foreign energy. So a political row.
Senior judges will review the prison sentences handed to 5 killers later, including the whole life term for Sarah Everard's murderer. A special sitting of the Court of Appeal will consider how such orders are imposed. They'll also look at the sentences handed to the killers of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Ukrainian officials and the United Nations are hoping to arrange more evacuations from a steel mill in Mariupol. More than 100 civilians have now reached relative safety, having sheltered at the site during weeks of Russian shelling. Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian MP, has told LBC many more people are still inside the plant, the last pocket of resistance in the city.
Right now, we know that there are still at least 800 wounded in the steel plant. And though they are military wounded, it will be extremely hard to get them out. And we are working right now on a separate terms of negotiations of how to let people out.
It's the last full day of campaigning before voters go to the polls across the UK tomorrow. Voting will take place across more than 140 councils in England and the whole of Wales and Scotland. People in Northern Ireland will also choose a new assembly at Stormont. Complaints about university courses were at the highest level on record last year. The Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education received more than 2,700 complaints. They included technology issues during online exams. And Liverpool have reached the Champions League final after a 3-2 win over Villarreal in Spain last night. The tie finished 5-2 on aggregate. They'll face either Manchester City or Real Madrid in Paris at the end of the month. In the city, the FTSE 100 will reopen at 75.61 after closing up 16 points yesterday. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.18. LBC weather: rain across northern and western parts will move southeastwards, turning heavy in some places with hail and thunder, becoming drier and brighter in the west, a high of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
It's the BT Spring Sale. Get superfast fibre for just $26.99 a month and get more of the things you want, like a £20 money-back speed guarantee, a Which Best Buy Smart Hub, and super safe Norton security included. Everything you want your broadband to be for just $26.99 a month. Hurry, ends 18th of May. Why choose anyone else? Join BT today. 24-month contract broadband only. New customers. CPI plus 3.9% increase each March. $31.99 for month 25. Terms apply.
In 300 yards, keep right to continue towards Tons Lane, A355.
LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
3 minutes after 7 on Wednesday, May the 4th. They cannot get out of the way of the money. It's a virtual cash machine. I speak of the oil companies. Profits soar in their billions.
Keep right.
Those windfall taxes pushed for some time by Labour. Chancellor Rishi Rishi Sunak hinting at it. Is it the way to go? I'll give you some of the figures. They are breathtaking, the amount of money, and see what you say of that. In other news, the first world leader to address the Ukrainian parliament since war began, Boris Johnson.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto the M4 slip road to London, Heathrow Airport.
For generations to come.
We'll assess the impact of that speech. Back home, it could be that the Chelsea deal is off. You'll be hearing from Sebastian now, Lord Coe. He's putting one bid forward. And as I say, among possibilities, it might not now actually proceed. We go to the United States. I will try to explain, but the impact of the so-called Roe v. Wade story, you probably have to live there to understand it. It makes or breaks elections. You can win a presidential election.
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
And there's a new development.
And welcome to Hannity. All right, we begin with news just breaking right now at this minute. According to a breaking new report from Politico, the U.S. Supreme Court has in fact voted to overturn Roe versus Wade.
And there have been more developments on that. Indeed, it was addressed by President Joe Biden.
Concerns me a great deal that we're going to have for 50 years decide the woman does not have the right to choose. And maybe the notion of privacy is thrown into question.
And why does Sir Keir continue to say there's nothing to see here over that Beergate party, as it would appear, Met Protection officers witnessed the events?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Let's talk windfall taxes. If you've listened to me for any time, you'll know I'm not normally a fan of punishing or overtaxing businesses. If you don't like the way the oil companies are run, why don't you set up your own one? Why don't you set up and go and do what BP or Shell do? But when the companies themselves say it's a cash machine, we don't know what to do with all the money, and of course we're in hard times, and I know the argument against windfall taxes as well. Okay, if companies are doing badly, you're going to reduce tax, but is this the instance that we should look at it? As we told you yesterday when the news broke, BP's profits for the first 3 months of this year more than doubled. These are profits, an underlying profit of nearly just under £5 billion, compared to, as I say, less than half that in the same period last year. So is it time to tax? Theo Usher, LBC's political editor, reports. Theo.
Soaring energy prices meant that BP made £4.9 billion profit in the first 3 months of this year alone. That's £54 million a day, more than £2 million an hour, or £37,000 every single minute. It's up significantly, as you say, Nick, on the £2 billion it made in January to March of last year. Unsurprisingly, the mega profits led to the likes of Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey renewing his call for a windfall tax on the energy companies.
We made it clear that when you see here BP making billions of profits, Shell and all the oil and gas companies, these were unexpected profits, windfall profits. There should be windfall tax. That would provide the money in a fair way to help the families and pensioners who are really struggling and give them a tax cut.
Now, at the moment, the government is only offering a loan scheme, get a £200 discount on your bills this year and then pay it back in 5 instalments of £40. But energy bills went up by 40% last month, and they could hit an average of £3,000 a year by October. Keir Starmer thinks the money from the windfall tax should be used to extend financial support to those on the lowest incomes through the Warm Homes discount.
I think what we've seen today in the figures that have come out in relation to the profits is the best evidence you could get as to why there should be a windfall tax. And I'm afraid the government's argument about why you can't have a windfall tax has been absolutely blown out the water. I'm afraid, yet again, they're putting profit above people in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
There's a cabinet split. Rishi Sunak likes the idea of a windfall tax reportedly, but Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng is opposed. And yesterday, the Prime Minister argued that if there is a windfall tax, it would deter investment in green technology.
What do you achieve if you simply take that money away in tax? Do you actually deter them from making the big changes that we need in our energy market? Because we really do. We need investment in supply. That's the big problem we've got.
But those comments were undermined by Bernard Looney, the boss at BP, who was asked about whether if there was a windfall tax it would deter investment, and he replied, there are none that we wouldn't do, i.e. investments that we wouldn't do, and that was of course seized on by Labour as a reason to press ahead with a windfall tax.
Theo Usher reporting. Let's turn to someone who's a senior member of BP. Professor Nick Butler is an energy economist, was Group Vice President for Strategy and Policy Development at BP, and also was Senior Policy Advisor to former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And he joins me now. Professor, why no windfall tax, do you say? Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Nick, I think we're in the middle of you'd think there was an election on all this knockabout about windfall tax. I think we ought to look at the facts. BP have made a lot of money. They have also lost a lot of money at the same time by coming out of Russia. I think we should be looking at what they're doing with the money. And they made announcements yesterday. They're going to invest more in the North Sea, and they're going to invest more in renewables in the UK, actually more in low carbon than in oil and gas. And they're also going to invest around the world. And we need that for energy security. The current crisis is driven by the fact that if we cut off Russian supplies, there will be a shortage of supply. So we need to replace that. And that's what companies like BP and Shell, who report their results very soon, and we'll get a similar storm around them, they need to be doing that. And the government is encouraging them to do that. And I think they've got to deliver. If they don't deliver, then they're going to be vulnerable to these sort of pressures.
But Professor, I don't need to tell you that there is a cost of living crisis, and reportedly we have elderly women spending their day going around on a bus because they can't afford to heat their homes, and we have the boss of one of these companies saying it's a cash machine. For the love of God, why shouldn't they pay some back on this during this exceptional period?
Because I'm not saying they shouldn't pay some back. They do. I mean, we have
just this because of the extraordinary profits they make.
Let me finish the point.
Go ahead.
They do pay some back. We have a progressive tax regime. They pay more as they make more profits. So they're paying something. I think I feel very sorry for all the people who are caught up in the cost of living crisis. But this would actually make it worse over time if you put a windfall tax, because they wouldn't be able to invest in all the things they need to invest in to provide energy security for the future. I think the government should be looking at projects like HS2, 100 billion, totally unnecessary. And if they rediverted some of that to the people you're talking about, I think that would be morally right.
But lastly, Professor, you have one of the bosses saying that effectively they can't get out of the way of the money. Their R&D, research and development, will already be priced into their next year's and the year after plans. This is an extra billions of pounds that have washed in just as a one-off. Why shouldn't they give more back?
Because more is needed now. They need to have more projects to bring on more oil, gas and low-carbon renewables over the next few years. Otherwise, this energy crisis will just go on and on.
I'm grateful for your time. Thank you, Nick Buckley. You're a professor and energy economist. You serves as Group Vice President at BP, and you're a Senior Policy Advisor to former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. Listening to that is Dr. Niata Van Boulay, who's Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. Thank you for coming on, Doctor. Are you a fan of the so-called windfall tax, and if so, why? Good morning.
Good morning. I think a windfall tax at this point in time is an absolute no-brainer. I think
as in they should do it, of course, yes?
As in they should do it. It's an absolute no-brainer. When you have the sort of, again, the cost of living crisis that we're seeing, the spike in prices that people are feeling is not run-of-the-mill. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's a massive shock that no household budget can absorb, and they need support. And when on the other hand, you have the energy generators and producers making supernormal profit, and I'll come to the points that were made, because the key point here is that it's not profits they were expecting to make. It's above what they were expecting. And the big question you need to be asking to someone like the other speaker is their capital expenditure plan, i.e. what they were planning to invest in other things like renewables, which absolutely they need to do. Has it massively changed to reflect the huge increase in profits? The answer is no. Instead, what we're seeing is that they're buying back shares. So they're pumping that money back into their company in order to boost their share prices. They're not increasing the scale of investment. So this is exactly the time when they have more money than they know what they need to do with, when they are not shifting their investment profile to reflect those supernormal profits, that we should be asking them to take a hit in order to help people who literally are eating one meal a day and not heating their homes in the 6th richest country in the world. It's absolutely extraordinary.
To the argument they've lost a lot of cash pulling out of Russia, how would you respond, Doctor?
Well, they have, and there's a blip in this quarter which has been priced in, but the fact that they're still seeing underlying profits of near 5 billion, despite that, I think tells you everything that you need to know. So it was right for them to pull out of Russia. They've done that, but even then the market is saying profits are healthy, it's buoyant, shares are going up, they are doing better than they expected to be doing. So this is absolutely the time, and I think actually in the boardroom, a lot of them would probably be saying, in this quite extraordinary time, if we were hit by windfall tax, it's probably the right thing to do.
Grateful for your time. Thank you, Dr. Beata van Bulle, you're Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. If you're pulling up on a petrol forecourt as we speak, or you're just driving off from a petrol forecourt, and you've paid, I would guess, diesel, 180, probably, a litre, 179, perhaps, roughly. Unleaded, I'm afraid I don't know, probably a little bit less, 169, 172, something like £1.62. And the profits, the unexpected profits, so the period before it was £2.6 billion, which you'd think is enough. Yesterday the figures were 4.9 billion. Just this once, shouldn't
In 2 miles at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
Speech, the first world leader to the parliament in Ukraine since the war began.
When we look at the heroism of the Ukrainian people and the bravery of your leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, we know that Ukraine will win.
Plus, blowing the whistle on the sale of Chelsea, it could be off. You'll hear from Sebastian, now Lord Co, who is backing one of the bidders, and
Former pub landlords accused of sending COVID bounce-back loans to ISIS fighters. And LBC's Rachel Venables with the story.
around 7:15 LBC News headlines now, Simon Conway.
As the cost of living crisis deepens, figures show shop prices are rising at their fastest rate in more than a decade. Senior judges will review the prison sentences handed to 5 killers later, including the whole life term for Sarah Everard's murderer. It's the last full day of campaigning before a series of elections across the UK tomorrow. LBC weather, rain or showers, heavy for some, becoming drier and brighter in the west, a high of 18 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb. Severe delays on the M25 clockwise. It's slow for about 45 minutes from junction 29 at the A127 to 31 at Lakeside. It's after an accident. But long delays continue on the A13 from Grays, and also all the surrounding routes, especially through Purfleet and Thurrock, are extremely congested. Also on the M1, there are delays of about half an hour northbound up to junction 14 at Milton Keynes. That's all down to an accident where 2 lanes are closed. And delays of about half an hour on the M40 southbound to junction 4 at High Wycombe, and that's all down to an accident, although all the lanes are now back open. In South Norwood, the High Street stays closed in both directions following an accident, and there are delays in the area.
LBC.
Today's tale begins the night the internet went down at the Smith family. Son, the dad watched on powerless as his son aged before his eyes.
The game has been loading forever. Save yourself from broadband nightmares. Get BT's unbreakable hybrid broadband backed up by EE, the UK's best network. Search BT Hybrid Broadband. 88% UK availability. 4G connection takes up to 175 seconds. Best for mobile network performance. Verify at ee.co.uk/claims.
Call Nick Ferrari now. 0345 60.
In a quarter of a mile at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes.
Clinically proven joint supplement for dogs, already helping nearly 2 million dogs every year. Try for a month today for just £5 and get up to 40% off future orders. Delivered free, straight to your door. Enjoy a more active dog in just 6 weeks or your money back. Guaranteed.
I like the way you move.
See umove.co.uk.
Exit at junction 3.
Subscription auto renews unless cancelled.
In a quarter of a mile at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the 4th exit onto the Parkway, A312.
Whether you're buying online or through our trusted dealers, feel good your way with Hey Car. T's and C's apply.
eToro is a social network.
No, eToro is an investment platform. It's both. That's social investing. In other words, it's where millions of people invest in stocks, share ideas and strategies. eToro, the power of social investing. Download eToro today from the App Store or Google Play. Your capital is at risk.
Waitrose believe that low prices are not the only essential when it comes to your groceries. That's why 80 essential Waitrose original blend tea bags for only £1.10 or 100% fair trade. And 2 pints of essential semi-skim milk for 95p are from free-range British cows. Find hundreds of products in the essential Waitrose range. Quality you'd expect at prices you wouldn't.
Selected lines and stores, subject to availability. Prices may vary in Little Waitrose, Channel Islands and concessions.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
19 minutes after 7, come to your reactions in just a moment on the idea of windfall taxes. Quick look at the front page of the newspapers and, well, as I often say, I don't think last night was possibly the night to be an editor of an...
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
I don't think there's 2 papers that have the same story. So very quickly through the very wide range of stories, the Daily Telegraph says that France is urged to come clean on Exocet.
Continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
Failed to tell UK of Falklands missiles kill switch. Yes, that story goes back 40 years to the Falklands War, 1982. On the front page, they have a picture, a historic picture, I suppose. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the first leader of the world to address the Ukraine Parliament since the world began, and will be assessing his speech right away. With Philip Collins, of course, former speechwriter to Tony Blair, in just a few moments' time. Quickly then, back to those front pages. The Eye tells us that the Rwanda migrant plan is in chaos. I think you probably knew that already. Interesting story on the front page of Metro that we're going to look at in later in greater detail. A former pub landlord sent thousands of pounds he borrowed in those COVID bounce-back loans to ISIS in Syria. A judge has been told. I hope you all heard that. A judge has heard. But we will look at that in more detail. The Daily Express, very buoyant here for Boris Johnson. I'll fire up the economy to beat the cost of living crisis. This is, as we are told, an elderly lady spends all day going around on the bus because she can't afford to heat her home. The Times tells us that privately educated pupils will lose their places at Oxbridge. This is a warning handed out to independent schools. The Roe v. Now, I've had the benefit of working in the United States. The impact over there of so-called Roe v. Wade, of the abortion story, it's impossible to describe to you unless you've been there. It can make or break a president. His or her, one day I'm sure, stance on Roe v. Wade. We will be explaining it to you later in the show. It's the front page of the Guardian, front page of the FT. Biden says leaked anti-abortion ruling imperils civil rights. Back here, one leader who's not saying a lot, it would appear to be Sir Keir Starmer. We're now calling this, well, I'm not, but it is now being called Beergate. This is what might or might have gone on with beer, pizzas and curries up in Durham. Reportedly, he was...
In a quarter of a mile, at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit and stay on the Parkway, A312.
In Durham, and he refused to say yay or nay. The Madeleine McCann story is the front page of The Sun and indeed the LBC website. That is pyjama fibres in suspects' van. This is, again, that Christian Bruckner, the German who was already being held, of course, in jail on other charges. And finishing with the Daily Mirror, they pick up actually on that interview in which they say actually they do the windfall tax story in a way that we've started actually. They've worked out something that I hadn't worked out, which I should have done. BP, good Lord, BP is raking in £639 a second. So they just made another £639, and another £639, and another £639, and fantastic. Surely that prompts the argument, doesn't it, for a windfall tax? David and Horsham, yes or no? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. I'm a little ambivalent about the tax. I just think sometimes we should remember that although these oil companies are big multinationals earning huge amounts of money, a large proportion of their dividends are paid to pension funds, which represents the interests of many ordinary people. So much as I may...
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway. Continue on A312 for 1.5 miles.
In the UK, I still think we should recognise that pension funds, which represent me, you, I'm sure you both like the pension, a lot of our money is invested in these companies, and so a lot of these profits are distributed via pension funds to ordinary people. So we do see the benefits. I just think we should see that in the context of that argument, rather than this constant narrative of beating up big business who are somehow the enemies of the people. Remember, we invest in these companies through our pension funds. Multi-billions, trillions every year is invested in them, and we receive the benefits.
£24,000 is what BP made while you've been talking. I was counting this.
Yeah, that's great.
24,000.
How much of that was paid to my pension fund?
I don't know. But at these exceptional times, when the additional profit is counted in the billions, surely just this once.
Additional profit is paid, some proportion of it is paid in dividends. what I'm trying to say is that we never hear the narrative of how much of that additional profit is paid out in additional dividends that wouldn't have been paid otherwise into pension funds, which benefits huge numbers of people. I'm not saying it's a complete counter-argument for the idea of a windfall tax, but I just think we should see some context. And this constant narrative that big business is the enemy of the ordinary person is immense, because so many of us are invested in shares.
Big business is far from the enemy. A big business provides, as you rightly say, it provides employment, it pays the mortgages, the rents, it pays to buy the food down at Sainsbury's or Asda or wherever you choose to shop. I absolutely get it, but to me, sir, this is a unique set of circumstances. David, a very powerful argument. Thank you for that. A lot of people want to get involved, and they will in a moment. Let's go to other stories just coming up on 7:25, and it was a world first for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the first leader to address the Ukrainian parliament since the Russian invasion. The war began in February. Ukraine's President Zelensky appeared in Parliament in person for the first time to watch the speech from Prime Minister Johnson, and he invoked Winston Churchill as he spoke of Ukraine's resistance and the finest hour. This is how his address closed.
It's a conflict that has no moral ambiguities or grey areas. This is about the right of Ukrainians to protect themselves against Putin's violent and murderous aggression. It's about Ukraine's right to independence and national self-determination against Putin's deranged imperialist revanchism. It's about Ukrainian democracy against Putin's tyranny. It's about freedom versus oppression. It's about right versus wrong. It's about good versus evil. And that is why Ukraine must win. And when we look at the heroism of the Ukrainian people and the bravery of your leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, we know that Ukraine will win. And we in the UK will do everything we can to restore a free, sovereign and independent Ukraine. Thank you all very much for listening to me today, and Slava Ukraini.
Boris Johnson yesterday. Now, as we always do with big speeches, we turn to the best in the business. Philip Collins is a former chief speechwriter to Prime Minister Tony Blair. You catch his column in the Evening Standard, and is also writer-in-chief for The Draft. Joins me now. Philip, how do you do?
Well, I think he did well. I mean, war gives you a sort of moral clarity that you don't get in any other issue. You know, you heard him say at the end, right versus wrong, good versus evil. That's not the kind of language you could ever risk on domestic politics. It sounds too high flown. But in time of war, with a nation genuinely in peril, it doesn't sound too high flown. It sounds appropriate. And I thought he did well. I mean, obviously, the invoking Churchill. Some people will say, well, Boris Johnson's always been obsessed with Churchill. He thinks he is Winston Churchill. But actually, it was rather understated, the reference to the finest hour. He didn't quite quote Churchill. He just referred it to the Ukrainians. And it was very much like Churchill's 1940 speeches in the sense that it set out a whole series of factual...
In 300 yards, turn right onto Roslin Avenue.
Well, it's still incredibly difficult, and for those who are fighting it. That's exactly what Churchill did in 1940. And yet, running through the speech is this assertion that they